Okay. Servaes Brewing Co. We opened exactly 1 year ago today. Yeah, 420 of last year we opened. We had a couple soft opening events before that, but today's our true 1 year anniversary. I think to kind of summarize what we do tons of new beers, a lot of variety. I think I'm encroaching on 300. I might be over 300. Genelia is the true keeper of the unique beers, so she's probably muted and can't chime in, but I think we're close to a 300, if not slightly over 300 on the unique beers. I started 2020 with the idea that we would slow down. We wouldn't do quite as many unique beers. We would try to take on some of our old recipes and tweak them and rebrew them to finesse. And then this whole COVID thing happened, and we've had to kind of adjust to that. Um, I think there's good and bad in that, but it's kind of where we are. I think most people probably say that we're known for heavily fruited sour beers. It's probably the thing that we sell the most of. I myself really like a good IPA, some barrel aged beers, some high ABV beers, but overall, I think the sour IPA game is really where we shine. So, despite my distaste for sours, I think that's kind of what we're known for.
Awesome. I think you kind of answered some of the questions that we're going to have in a little bit, so we'll just rehash that and make it more exciting.
Okay.
Should we unmute Genelia like periodically just to see if she wants to talk?
Yeah,
Um,
you might have my 2-year-old screaming in the background, but
that's awesome. I'm good with it. It'll be fine. Awesome. So we have a list of questions that we ask everybody, and then we kind of change them just a little bit to kind of fit the person that we're interviewing. The very first one's about branding your brewery. What do you want your brewery to be known for? And you just kind of hit on that a little bit. And how did you decide on the beers that you wanted to share with the world? So how do you decide that?
yeah, I kind of went into this knowing that I get bored easily, and I really wanted to do new stuff all the time. So that's kind of how I wanted to market ourselves, is constantly changing, evolving, rebrewing things over and over again, but also doing new stuff. So that was kind of the idea behind our brewery. What was the second half of that question?
How do you decide, or how did you decide the beers that you wanted to share with the world?
Yeah, so I basically took maybe 10 homebrew recipes that we had brewed over and over again with different adjuncts and just chose the base of those. So like we had a goza that I brewed probably 20 times with different things. And so I kind of chose beers based on the base, not necessarily the final product.
That's interesting. I know a lot of breweries nowadays are doing split batches, so I think that's kind of what you're hinting to a little bit. So having that core base beer and then you do some different flavors and have a whole new thing. So that's cool. All right, next question. Number one went well. Let's keep moving. What has been the biggest surprise with opening a brewery? I've heard many stories about things that people weren't expecting after opening, so I'm really excited to hear yours.
Yeah. Owning a business is a lot harder than you think. Both of my parents have small businesses. My dad he's a farmer. He owns a livestock auction barn, does a lot more sales probably a week than I will do in my entire month, or even maybe several months. And my mom owns a beauty salon. So I've got entrepreneur parents. And the other day I was talking to my dad and I said, Dad, why did you not tell me that I was never, ever going to get a day off again? That has been the most surprising thing. Even when you think like you have everything lined up, like this last weekend, I was like, I am going to stay home on Sunday. I'm going to spend some time with the kids. I'm going to grill. I'm going to, just do these things. And then I got a call probably at 1 p.m. that the air conditioning unit in the cooler had kind of come dislodged and was slowly falling off of the ceiling. And I thought, man, I'm never going to get a day off ever. So that has been the most surprising thing, is that even when you think you've got everything planned, you got everything, you're working ahead of time, you're never going to get a day off again, ever.
That's very fair. In my experience, when you own a brewery, you actually have 4 different jobs. So, yeah, 120 hours plus a week's no big deal. The air conditioner, that's interesting. That's an odd one to have happen. Brad was saying from G&T last week, he never knows what he's going to do, and that sounds like a lot like what you're saying. Sometimes the toilet breaks, sometimes you have to fix an AC unit. So
it's crazy the amount of just random shit that breaks that you have to fix because you can't afford to hire someone else, or it's a Sunday in the middle of your anniversary weekend and you really need the cooler to be working.
yeah, I think Rodney, if I'm not mistaken, had that issue too at Three Halves. It was somebody in the industry definitely had that same kind of issue. Busy time and something unexpected happened. So
Yeah.
all right, so we've talked about the biggest surprise. Let's talk about the one thing you love the most about owning your brewery.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the thing I love the most about owning a brewery is like the fact that people, they pay for my beer. That is amazing. And I don't know that it ever gets old that like I brew a beer and I put it online and people buy it, right? Like how amazing is that? You want my beer, really? You're willing to pay money for my beer. That's amazing. And I just think that's the coolest, most unexpected, not sure if I'm ever going to get over it scenario when it comes to owning a brewery.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we all homebrew, but I don't think anyone in our club would actually expect people to pay for our beer, would we? Andy says absolutely not. Storms is a big no. That's awesome. Let's talk about social media. This is a question that Christian really likes to ask because he's doing that for our club, and I think it's his way to get some insight into how you run things. So, how do you run your social media presence, and what strategies do you find the most effective?
Yeah, I think Genelia probably could contribute more to this than I can, but we really wanted to document everything that we're doing, not just, once a week, we've got this beer coming out, let's post about it, or not all the goods, not all the bads. Like we really wanted to make it a very personal experience. My 2-year-old's throwing a fit right now. Can you maybe disengage off the deck where I came to hang out?
It's all good. It's an added soundtrack. We need it.
Yes. So we really wanted to make our social media presence very personable. So we post a lot about my wife and I personally, my sons personally, and I think that's unique, and also it can be very rewarding. It can also be a little bit risky, a little bit you feel like you're kind of bearing your soul to the world. So we're trying to kind of somewhere in the middle.
Fair enough. It makes a lot of sense. I think you kind of hit on something too. A lot of places will only post like their releases or the things that are going great. So I really like the fact that you say you also kind of post some of your struggles. That's a really good behind the scenes look for everybody.
There are a lot of struggles.
Hey, that's what happens when you open a brewery. They didn't tell you?
No.
All right, let's move into creating beers. A nerd question that we always like to ask, especially me, is your philosophy behind beer. So, like mine, for example, is beer should be fun. It should always be fun, even when it's not. Try to make things light and have a good time with it. And then I'm also really big on, I know there are classic styles, but classic styles exist because someone tried a new beer. So I think there's room for like experimentation, which is something I love about what you do. So what's your overall philosophy behind beer?
Yeah, I don't know that it's that different from yours. I opened a brewery because it was the thing that I did that made me the most happy. Um, Even if I was staying up until 2 a.m. finishing a beer because the brew day went terrible, that finished product really made me happy. And I think that is entirely what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to have fun. I'm trying to produce things that really make me happy, things I'm proud of. So my sort of philosophy behind beer is just have fun. It should be an enjoyable experience and like a continual learning experience. So I never consider my job done, or like I never think, oh, I know everything there is to know about beer. I'm just gonna end right here. Like this is it. So
Right on. Sorry, I was checking our chat to see if anyone had any questions yet. Alex, I don't know if that's a question. Can you clarify there in the chat for me? So while he's doing that, we'll move on. Let's talk about recipe formulation. Where do you start when something pops in your head?
I always go back to Brewing Classic Styles. It's my favorite book. I've got it sitting next to me at my desk in the brewery. It's sort of warped from all the humidity in the brewery, but anytime I think, oh, I really want to try that, whether it be something I've done before or something I've never done, I always go back to that book as just a baseline. I'm not saying that I brew that recipe exactly like it is in that book, but it gives me a good starter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what you kind of hit on, I've talked to other brewers that kind of do that same thing where they'll use that as like a baseline and then change some things up. Do you find that pretty consistent in most of the recipes in there, that all of them kind of need a little tweak?
I mean, if you wanted to do an amazing base style with, just a very traditional, I think you could just brew straight out of that book. Um, but I do think that there's a lot of room to grow. I don't know that the brewing community today wants traditional beer. I think they want traditional beer with a little tweak, or they want absolutely fantastic traditional beers. So if you can't nail a traditional beer to the T, then making some small tweaks makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. I'll echo exactly what you said. That makes a lot of sense. We actually do have the first question from the gallery. Alex says, "Haters are wrong. How do you deal with people that don't like your beer, or I don't even know like the best way. Really, that's all I've ran into is people maybe not liking the beer that you brewed and having critiques on like the style. How do you kind of deal with that when people give you that kind of feedback?"
It's probably the most challenging part of the job is the people that don't like your beer. When you're a home brewer and you go to these festivals and you put your beer out there, you kind of don't hear the negative. All you hear is the positive. You see these people that are lining up to get your beer and you think, wow, I'm a home brewer and people love my beer. But you don't really hear about the people that are dumping it or, saying really mean things about it. And it is a really difficult thing that I don't know that I was properly prepared for. So you could brew a perfect beer and people are going to complain about it. So we try to just be nice. We try to be kind. We probably offer more refunds than we probably should. Someone complains because they bought a beer that they thought would have X, even though the label says it's going to be this, and they want a refund. And we probably err on the side of kindness more than a lot of businesses. So we offer refunds, we offer credits as often as we can to people who are unhappy. A lot of the times I secretly hope these people do not come back to my brewery because I think they're perpetual complainers. I don't know that I have ever complained. I've drank a lot of beer and I don't know that I ever have sent a message to a brewery and said, this beer was terrible. This beer did not deliver. It's just not what I think beer is about. So it's not something that I'm going to do. But when you own a brewery, people do it all the time. But it's hard. It really is. I try to think about the positives, the number of people that come back week over week to buy our beer, despite the people that say, hey, we didn't like this, or hey, this didn't deliver on what we thought it was going to do. So I think you just have to kind of, go with the flow, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. Some customers just can't be happy. They don't want to be happy. There's no way to please them. And I think you also brought up a good point, like people are going to complain that just want to complain and it doesn't matter what you do. I think like the other really important thing to consider when it comes to haters is like how many awesome people there are. With bartending at both Diametric and Winship, I've had people that I've handed like an English IPA to and they were expecting an American IPA. And they take the first step and they're like, oh, that's not really fruity. That wasn't what I was expecting. And you can tell like when people are kind of struggling with the beer and I've always offered to like pour them another one. And there's so many times like when people that don't really, when we're drinking something that's not necessarily their style, they don't want to give it back because they want to finish the beer. It's like a learning experience for them too. So I think I'd like to add that onto there. Like there's a lot of really awesome people in the beer scene too.
No, that is true. I mean, for every person that you get that says 1 star, I hate sours on a sour beer, you have someone that says, this was the best beer I've ever had, and it really offsets it. But man, when you see someone checking a beer that is an IPA and they say 1 star, I hate hops, and you think, why did you buy that beer? Why did you do that?
Yeah, it's really funny you say that. Mac would always, a lot of people would come in, and sour's a great example. Yeah, I'm really not big on sours, but I want to try this fruited goza or something. And Mac would always be like, we're not trying to change your mind. If you don't like sours, you're not going to like this beer. So, it's funny that you say that.
Yeah.
Let's dig into like the 1-star reviews and Untapped. Like, how much attention do you pay to Untapped, and do you take it all with a grain of salt? Where's that kind of sitting with you nowadays?
So I probably pay more attention to it than I should. I checked Untapped daily just to see. I'm more looking for true issues with my beer than this person that didn't like sours that checked in a sour. So I'm looking for carbonation issues. I'm looking for any off flavors, those kinds of things. So if someone randomly says this beer was terrible, it doesn't really resonate with me as much as if I see 7 people that say this beer is terrible. So I constantly am looking at Untapped. Probably won't admit that anywhere else, but it's something that I pay a lot of attention to. I made the mistake of giving my mom Untapped rights one day, and she gets so pissed. Like, she just wants to attack these people. Like, how could you say that? And I'm like, Mom, it's cool. Like, I have made stupid comments on Untapped 5 years ago when I knew nothing about beer and I knew nothing about how people are looking at these. So there is a level of, you have to kind of just let it go and drink a beer and just move on. But I always look for consistencies. If there's a certain beer that consistently is getting this rating or consistently getting some comments about it, that's more what I look for on Untapped.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And that's something I never would have considered is, brewers checking it for, like you said, packaging issues, carbonation issues. And I really like that you mentioned trending data in a way, right? So the one person that just hates sours, that doesn't so much matter, but
Yeah.
maybe there's a style like, and it's just consistently at like a 3.5. How can we make that beer better? I think that's an awesome way to use it.
Yeah.
We have another question. Brewery atmosphere has a bit to do with experience of drinking there. So how did you choose your brewery's atmosphere? It seems quite unique. And I would agree with that. How did you picture that coming together?
Well, what do you foresee as unique about it?
I was muted. My favorite thing, honestly, is like your taps. You have a lot of colors going on too. I think that's really cool. It's open. There's not, I mean, you walk in the door and you have the whole atmosphere there. But the most unique thing, and maybe it's not unique, but it is to me because I'm ignorant to it, is how you have like your tap set up on the wall. And I really like the tile on the back bar too. It looks really cool.
Yeah. So when we started construction, we had a set amount of money. There was absolutely no more that we could get. This was what we had. So we kind of tried to communicate that as effectively as we could. And that's pretty much why you have the simplicity of our tap room. You have a very wide open space. My wife loves modern, she loves simplistic, and she loves bright. So that was kind of what we went with, was a kind of modern, bright, and clean, fresh, simple look to the tap room. And also, if we could fit all of that into this budget that we had, that was what we were willing to do. Um, I kind of have some plans for. There's one really white wall right when you walk in on the right side that I kind of have a vision for how to make that some big mural of some kind. But when we opened it, we just wanted to keep it as fresh and clean and kind of modern as we could with our budget.
That makes sense. And Storms also chimes in with he really likes the artwork that you have.
Yeah, thank you. We had one of the designer, one of the construction people. She kind of had an art background, and she jived really well with us. We just went with it.
Makes a lot of sense. Use the people you know, right? Um, okay, the next thing I want to talk about is crazy beers. And I don't mean offense by that, but you have a lot of outlandish ideas that are awesome and they come together really well. So I want to talk about crazy beers. So why is that your thing? Why do you really like to do things that most people aren't trying to brew?
Yeah, I that's a question I get asked a lot, and I don't know that I have like a sound answer for that. I'm someone that gets bored really, really easily. I'm also someone that is always thinking about the next thing. So for me, I'll be sitting around and I'll drink a beer and it will remind me of something, and I think, man, I could do that. And rather than rebrewing the same beer, I think I want to try that. And I think there are pros and cons to that approach. I think we are still trying to find that sort of happy medium where we're trying new things, but we're also finessing the old things. Some things work out fantastic and amazing, and some things don't. And that is the risk that you take when you're trying all these different things. But at the end of the day, when I come into work on a Monday, my week is never the same because we're always trying something new.
Yeah, I want to ask you, like, how do you decide what's next? But I also want to know, like, you just hit on, you never really know how a product's going to turn out when you haven't brewed it before. So has that kind of bitten you ever, or have you had pretty good luck with most things coming out and it being exactly what you were after?
I don't know. I think there's only been a couple that I probably feel like it was a true failure. The majority of them, I feel like, were a success in that we achieved a decent flavor profile, albeit I'm very rarely like consider my beers like done. Um, so yeah, absolutely. Some of them turn out not as great as you think. Some of them turn out really well, and you're like, wow, I have no idea how that worked. I just added 20 pounds of a cereal to a beer, and it tastes exactly like that. Other times you're like, man, I added so much of that, and I got nothing. So I mean, it is a risk. It's fun. I said earlier that we kind of went into 2020 wanting to sort of shy away a little bit from doing so many new beers and sort of go back to some of the ones that we did and, finesse them. And then everything with the current state of things happened, and that has kind of changed our path forward. But I do think that's the right approach. I definitely think throwing spaghetti at the wall is a good approach your first year, just to try to figure out what works, what doesn't work. What are your customers like? What do they don't like? Some of the things that I thought people would love, they didn't love. Some of the things I thought people would hate, they loved. It's been a really interesting first year.
So after this pandemic, can you give us any kind of like inside information on what beers you think you might be bringing back? Something we can get excited for?
Yeah, so we just bought two 7-barrel fermenters. So we're a 3-barrel fermenter. We have 3-barrel kettles. We have 8 3-barrel fermenters, and that's kind of how I thought we would function for the first year. But prior to the quarantine, we were really having a difficult time keeping up. We couldn't provide to-go options. We couldn't have, I mean, there were some weeks we had like 5 beers on tap, and I have 10 taps on the wall. volume was a huge issue for us. So I was like, we really need to buy some bigger fermenters. We have the capability of doing 6-barrel. So let's buy some bigger fermenters. And then everything happened and we sort of dragged our feet a little bit just because we didn't know if we were going to be in a situation where we were selling no beer or where we would be. But we just purchased 2 7-barrel fermenters. So our sort of plan with that is to have, I don't want to say flagship beers because that's not what they are, but more flagship based styles. So every time you come in, we're going to have a goza of some kind. It's not always going to be the same goza, but it's going to be a goza. Every time you come in, we're going to have this stout. It's going to have some sort of different adjunct to it, but it's going to be this stout. But we were unable to do that without an increase in volume.
Hey, when you struggle to keep up, that's always a good problem to have, but it sure is frustrating, I'm sure.
It's terribly frustrating.
Yeah.
It continues to be a problem to this day, being able to anticipate which beers people are going to be want all of them, and then which beers people are just going to be sort of interested in. It's interesting.
Let's talk more about like your beers and like how do you decide what's next? Where do you get all these ideas for like, the pie beers? I mean, just look at this 4-pack, right? There's 3 in a different beer, but there's 3 totally different beers here. Where do you come up with like that inspiration, and how far out are you on beers? Do you have like 20 ideas like just in the queue waiting to come out?
I saw that Brad said, am I in a cave? No, I'm outside actually, but apparently my lighting is bad. Let's see if I move over here. Is that better? Am I less in a cave? Ideas. I drink a lot. I cook a lot. So I'm always kind of getting ideas from things I've made, things I've tasted, things I've tried, things I've read about. I think that's one area that I do really well with, is constantly just reading, researching, learning new things. And yes, we have a schedule. I remember when we first got started talking to Mac about it, and he was like, just throw your schedule away. Like, it's just get rid of it. It doesn't exist. You can try all you want, but, and I was determined to prove him wrong. I'm someone that really needs a schedule. I need to know when I come in on Monday, these are the 3 things that I really need to accomplish that week, or the 2 beers I need to brew. Like, I'm just someone that really needs that. So we do have a schedule, and it actually sticks pretty closely to it. Our schedule is very, very, very fluid, but it also depends a lot on holidays, right? So we've got Cinco de Mayo coming up. Well, we're going to do some Cinco beers. Like, there's a schedule that is flexible, but it's also not flexible because it centers a lot around events or holidays or things like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We do have a couple more questions here from some members. So Alex wants to know if you had to do it all over again. And Alex, correct me if I don't have the spirit of your question here, but I believe he's asking, so what formula would you go with for brew house to fermenters to taps? Is there anything that you would change, or are you pretty happy with everything that you elected to go with?
So there are a lot of things I would change. First and foremost, I would make sure that my entire brew house had floor drains. Just the entire brew house would be a floor drain. Um, so that would be my number one suggestion if you were going to open a brewery. Make sure you have floor drains the entirety of your brew house. But I remember talking to a friend of mine that owns Norseman Brewing in Topeka, and I was asking him, what size should I be? Is 3-barrel enough? Should I go 7-barrel? What should I do? And he said, go bigger than you think you should. And I, at the time, was like, no. He's in Topeka. He's got a completely different situation. He doesn't know what he's talking about here. And he said, you're going to sell all of the product you produce. So the more you produce, the more you're going to sell. And I completely disregarded him. I mean, I kind of had it in the back of my head, but I just couldn't imagine a scenario in which a 3-barrel brew house wasn't enough for downtown Shawnee. And I was completely wrong. And if I could do it over again, I would probably go with the 7-barrel brew house. So here we are, year 2, and I'm buying 2 7-barrel fermenters. I have 8 3-barrel fermenters, and I have a 3-barrel brew house that can do 6-barrel. So I would go bigger.
Makes a lot of sense. If you ever need to get rid of some of those 3-barrel fermenters, I think Nick up in Iowa might take you up on that.
He should go bigger.
Yeah. So yeah, his town's like 12,000 people. I want to say it's right around there. And you know, he lucked into some really good deals, especially with like BKS and Brian, really helping him out get set up. So I think he's looking to have a 3-barrel system, and I think he has a couple 6-barrel fermenters that he's looking to buy too. So let's talk about wood aged beers. We also like to talk about this with every guest. How do you recommend people get started in wood aged beers? More specifically, was there a book that you read or someone that kind of helped start your barrel project or gave you some of that advice?
Yeah. I don't know that there was really anybody that gave me advice on wood aged beer. We don't do anything wild, so everything in our brewery is bourbon barrel, rum barrel, and it's all clean. So we've got barley wines, we've got stouts, that sort of thing, imperial porters. I think the best thing for someone to do that's wanting to get into that is to buy a small barrel. Contact like Restless Spirits or, you know, some of the local distilleries. They have 8-gallon barrels that they will offload pretty easily, and just get one and like learn about it. That for me, I got that Requiem barrel from Boulevard, and that was kind of my first entry into barrel aging. I remember I got it and it was super dry and I had no idea what I was doing, and I filled it and it just started leaking everywhere, and I was like, what is happening? Why is this happening? I just bought it. So I
Night ever too, I'm sure.
it actually it slowly sealed up, and I topped it off and it turned out fine. But
Awesome.
it was really rough. Like it was a rough, like I remember thinking I'm never gonna do a barrel again. Like this is bullshit. I just bought this. But that's probably my best advice is just buy like a small one. So you're like only experimenting with one batch of beer and just go for it. You don't need like a special like bulldog or anything like that. Like a siphon works just fine for your first one. Just get one, fill it as fast as you can, and let it sit for 6 months before you even touch it.
That's good advice. I recently just filled my first barrel. It smelled amazing going in. Hopefully it smells as good coming out. We'll see.
I think it smells good going in. It's probably a good start.
Yeah. What is your favorite hop and why?
I love Citra. I'm a Citra whore. I love it, love it, love it. Cannot get enough of it. Doesn't matter with the year. You give me like a 2017 Citra and I still love it better than everything else. I love it. That said, I really dig Denali. I think it is a completely underrated hop in the juicy world. I have no idea why it's so underrated. Like you can't even find it on like Yakima and some other websites like that. Like it's just, no one even knows about it, but it's great. I also like Idaho 7. I also really like Strata. So those are some of my favorite hops.
Sorry, I'm still here. I'm typing out some of your answers. While I'm finishing that, you mentioned Strata. I went to Minnesota recently, and every New England that I had with Strata was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Such a good hop. Since we're talking about Citra, and that's kind of a really big hop right now, I'm going to go down to Brad's question. I was kind of waiting for like a good time to fit it in. How do you stay ahead of the trends?
I think you have to, in order to stay ahead, you really have to follow some really great breweries. So I'm constantly having friends bring me back you know, breweries that really get access to some of these fantastic hops ahead of time. Like the first Strata beer I had was a Weldworks beer. I'd never heard of Strata. It didn't mean anything to me, but it was in an IPA. It said it had Strata, and I had it, and I immediately thought, I've got to find that hop. I think at the time when I had it, it was still like one of the Yakima experimental hops. It didn't even have a name yet. So I really think trying different things, thank you, reading about it, keeping up with like Yakima, they always post about their experimental hops, things like that. They're really key to kind of staying ahead of any trends.
That's really good advice. And I think a lot of people that I've talked to in this club, they all watch menu boards too. So they'll see what hops are in a beer, and they'll look at ratings, and they'll also watch just like recipe ideas. Everyone's
Yeah.
saying hi to Weston. Weston says, I recently used Southern Passion. Smells like tangerines and passion fruit. Sounds amazing, to be honest. All right, let's move on to yeast. And we got about 3 more questions, and then we're close to halfway done. So if you want to make a beer run or take a time out for a second, we can do that. So what is your favorite yeast to ferment with?
Yeah. I love Chico for the majority of our beers, whether it be a stout or, a pale ale. I just really think Chico, USO5, Old Reliable is what I call that yeast. And as a home brewer, I always had a packet in the fridge in case something didn't work out. I just toss it in there. I love how shelf stable it is. I love how cheap it is. So even now as a professional brewer, USO5 is by far my favorite yeast. With that said, all of our New Englands are, they do not use USO5. They use some sort of London ale or Conan. But USO5 is probably, if I had to pick a yeast that I would use for every beer, that would probably be it.
A reliable workhorse. I use a lot of Cali Dry and USO5. How do you formulate a good sour recipe? You are known for fruited sours. You put out a lot of them, and they're all delicious. So how do you go about formulating a good sour recipe? And then how do you decide what adjuncts you want to throw in there?
So I personally don't like sours. It's like surprising to most people that I prefer to not drink them. But my wife, early on in our relationship, she did not drink any sort of alcohol, and I was determined to change that about her. And so we started, with Schlafly pumpkin ale and whatnot, and slowly she decided she really likes sours, and I thought, man, I need to be able to brew these. Like, she loves them. So I started brewing them. It was a disaster. I mean, I used like uncrushed grain to try to use the lacto in them to sour. Then I tried all kinds of different approaches to sours before I sort of settled on what works for us now. But I think sours are actually one of the easiest things to brew and the most forgiving styles to brew. They're very intimidating for most people, but my approach to sours is always, 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 always been with my wife in mind. So something that she would like. Our sours tend to be tart but sweet. So I always look to fruit for those. We have a line of sours that use odd things like coffee, jasmine, things like that. But the majority of our sours are heavily fruited in some way. And man, people love the heavily fruited sours. They love them. So.
Yeah, it seems like New England's fruited sours, heavily adjuncted stouts, and then honestly, to me, I see a lot of like lagers coming back. Alma Mater, I go there every time, and I get a slow pour. It's the first thing I get. So I think just a really great lager is coming back too. Let's talk about stouts. How do you formulate a good stout recipe?
Um, Basically, basically everything you read in a book is wrong if you want to put it in a barrel. Today's stouts are so syrupy, so thick, so sweet that you're not going to find a book that has that recipe. And I think that is really difficult for a lot of people. I think traditionalists want a Riz, right? And a Riz is not the thing that people are looking for in today's craft beer. So for me, I always kind of think I want it to be super sweet, super thick, and as high as ABV as I can pull off without it burning. Um, so I kind of have a base in mind, but I mean, I think we're at maybe 7 or 8 different imperial stouts to date, and they're all a lot different in their grain bills. I mean, there's so many unique grains you can use. The last one that I did that's sitting in a fermenter now, it used no roasted barley, no black malt. It was all crystals, and it was just a layered crystal grain bill. Because I had heard from Cross Strain in Omaha that they really like the layered crystal malts, that it provides a layer, like a milk chocolate flavor that the roasted malts just can't deliver on. So I was like, oh, let's give that a try. So a lot of our stouts are just listening and learning and trying new things. There are just so many different malts out there that you can try that it's really hard to be like, oh, I'm just going to slightly change this recipe. You don't have to slightly change it. You can completely change it and you're still going to get a great stout.
That's really interesting what you said about, well, shout out to Cross Stream, first of all, fantastic brewery. Back to the clean beers and the lagers. Oh my goodness, they do fantastic work. The crystal malts for a milk chocolate flavor, that's very interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, things like that, or using sugar, using like a sugar in the raw, or candy syrup instead of relying all on your base malts is kind of what a lot of these big breweries are doing. And you have to go out and meet them to find those things out. But so none of our recipes are ever exactly the same or even very similar. They're all different.
That's pretty awesome. Weston has a question. How do you deal with fruit in your sours, and most likely fruit in any of your beers? Do you like frozen, fresh fruit, purees? What are you doing there, if you're willing to answer? Don't give away any trade secrets.
Yeah, I don't really have any trade secrets.
Yeah.
I was a home brewer for so long that like I hung on to the answers of all the brewers. So I kind of believe strongly in just sharing as much information as I can. So we use Oregon fruit. Those are our fruit purees. As a home brewer, I use vintners a lot. Oregon really wasn't a financial option, but the vintners from the homebrew shop worked really well. It's super expensive, but it worked well. So we buy a pallet of fruit at a time from Oregon. It costs a lot of money and it sits in our cooler for a long time, takes up a lot of space, but that is what we use. It's just a puree. They have a wide variety of flavors, very similar to vintners. And then I also really, really like to offset our puree with a little bit of, not necessarily extract, but Amaretti has their own line of purees that are very flavorful. So we usually probably go 90% true puree and about 10% Amaretti puree. It like I said, it has kind of like an extract component to it, but it is also like partially artificial, partially puree. And it works really well. That extra pop of flavor at the end really helps with the aroma, really helps the flavor. So that's kind of what we do.
I'm not sure how many of the club members are familiar with Amaretti, but that's something I've used too. I've tried their chocolate and their coconut and a handful of other things, and I'm kind of with you. It can get extracting. I think the key with that is really just balancing how much you use it. So use it to taste more than anything. And I guess like Oregon, if Oregon fruit or whatever it's called, that is that aseptic fruit that like comes in the big box? Is that what it
Yep.
is? Gotcha.
Yep. Yep.
All
Yeah.
right, we're gonna.
If you're a
Oh, go ahead.
if you're a home brewer, you can reach out to Amaretti and they'll send you a box of samples for free. All you have to do is just tell them your name, your address. They'll send you a big box of puree for free. So try it out. It's awesome.
Sounds like an awesome company, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We're gonna get into tips for new brewers. Do you want to take a break and get a beer? Or are you good to keep moving?
Up to you.
I have this much beer left, so
You need a
we'll
beer
keep
break.
going. All right, I'm going to take a timeout and I'll be right back. Andy, I actually thought about unmuting you all, but I didn't know like how crazy it would be. Kyle, you're right. It probably would be super crazy. All right, let's take a head count. Looks like Storms might be grabbing a beer. I think everyone else is here. Courtney, you did that thing where you muted yourself again.
Sorry.
It's all good. I bet. And yes, I still left you muted, Andy. I know how this group gets. Wow, so rude. All right, we're going to get into tips for new brewers. What is the most overlooked piece to brewing good beer at home?
I used to think that equipment was super important, like having the nicest equipment, having the most efficient equipment. But one of the best homebrewers I ever met still brews on a 5-gallon bucket. That's what he ferments in. He's got like a kettle, propane burner in his front. So honestly, I think hygiene, cleanliness, keeping up with just fermentation temperatures. I think those are some of the things that can make you the best home brewer, is just working on cellar control, working on, the type of fermenter that you use and how clean it is. I think those are probably the keys.
Sanitation is very important. I echo that big time. Looking at my chat to see if I missed anything. Well, it looks like they're mostly just giving me shit. Christian, I'm not going to ask any of your questions, just so you know. Let's see. Actually, I told Christian to message me the question, so I'm lying. All right, I think we're caught up. Questions. Oh, well, this is a good one. Brad wants to know. Oh, is that Brad? Also, Brad Still. That's shot or no, that's Eric. He wants to know, Billy, how did you get so good looking? You know, man, my mom. But I get my beauty from her. Maybe that'll get me brownie points. All right, let's move on to what's the easiest thing you can do that has the biggest impact on homebrew beer, aside from sanitation. Can't use that answer again.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I think probably yeast is super important as a home brewer, just making sure that you use high quality yeast, healthy yeast. I remember going down the basement like the day after and like waiting for it to bloop because I just didn't have any confidence that my yeast was going to be good enough. And then like sending my wife like text messages all day, like, can you go down the basement and check? Is it working? Is it so I think probably investing in yeast that you feel confident in, whether it be pitching 2 packets instead of 1. I think that probably goes a long way from like just an anxiety perspective, as well as just there were times that I had to pitch, USO5 because whatever I pitched did not take off. I probably bought it, let it sit too long, all those things. So I think yeast is probably a underrated ingredient in the homebrew world.
Would you say, I guess you would say equipment is probably something you wish. So the question here is, name something that you wish you knew when you first started begin brewing that you know now. I know you already mentioned like the equipment, which I think was an awesome answer. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Um, if I were gonna like redo my home brewing thing, I probably would have went straight to electric just from like an ease of use, consistency standpoint. I think I went through that whole let's buy 3 different vessels and pumps, and let's buy the nicer cooler, let's do this whole thing. And I brewed fantastic beer that way, but at the end of the day, if I could just go buy an electric brew in a bag again, that's the best investment that I ever made as a home brewer. Um, so I think probably just spending the extra money on whatever it is, whether it be a fermenter that you're like, I don't know that I want to spend the extra $25 on that fermenter. Like as a home brewer, I think the best thing I could have ever done was just spend the little bit extra money to buy the upgrade because you're going to buy it anyway.
All right, next thing is going to be about grain storage and bulk grain storage. What malts would you suggest that brewers keep on hand once they break into that all grain brewing?
Yeah, definitely a pills, definitely a pale malt of some kind. I actually really, really, really love Viking malt. It's fairly new. You can get it on more beer, but it has some chemical compounds that are they tend to not oxidize, so it's really good for a variety of beers. Beers that are going to sit in a fermenter, that has a lot of headspace for a long time. They are very they don't oxidize. There's some chemical compound in them that does not oxidate, so I think it is a great grain for a homebrewer to just keep on hand. Crystals, all the crystals, whether it be Crystal 10, Crystal 40, Crystal 80. I love Crystal 120. I actually really, 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 really like Special B. It's probably one of my favorite malts of all time. That like, raisiny flavor. Maris Otter is probably my go-to when it comes to base malt. I love Golden Promise, love Turo, but Maris Otter, that's what I get. 90% of my palate is Maris Otter. So, and wheat. I like white wheat a lot, so I probably go there. Some flaked oats. Basically, all the grain. Just
Yeah,
have
I
it.
was gonna say, so basically every grain, I think, right? How about hops? Let's get into that. I know Citra is one of your favorites. What other hops would you recommend that people keep around?
Yeah. People love Mosaic. I am not a huge Mosaic fan, but people love it. I really like the bubble gum of El Dorado. I actually really dig Azaka. I think it works really well in a variety of beers. So, and it's relatively cheap. I think it's a good one. Amarillo is really good. Simcoe is a great versatile hop. It can be good in an American IPA as well as a New England. So those are kind of my faves.
Looks like Brad wants to put you in the seat here. He wants to know who the person is that inspired you as a home brewer.
Yeah, I don't think I've really hidden that
Oh,
as a secret. I think I've been pretty honest about the fact that Angelo at Yankee Tank kind of got me into home brewing. He to this day is the person that if I have some, I don't know, like some question or I'm thinking about doing something crazy and I just need somebody to talk me off the cliff or help me think it through, he continues to be that person that I bounce ideas off of. And I think everybody needs that person, you know. There are other people that I reach out to. I regularly reach out to Mac and say, hey, dude, do you ever try to do this? Or, you know, like there are all those people in the home brewing community that you really start to feel like you can reach out to. But at the end of the day, if I had one person that I would ask a question about a variety of things, it would always be my mentor, which is Angelo.
so I stand corrected. It wasn't Brad. It was also Brad, who I think at the time was Clay Camp, who is now Enrico. So I'm very confused with these names. Another one from, from the members. Do you grow any hops yourself?
I do not. I never have. My wife forbid me from growing anything on our very small strip of land that resembles a hop. I wish I could. I really, 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 really like Canuck from Kansas Hop Co. So that is something if you want like a local hop. I love the Canuck. It's my favorite of all the hops that they do. It's got a great juicy character to it that is unlike any Kansas hops. So.
Do you know if Kansas Hopco, we're actually going to have them on in a couple weeks. Do you know if they sell rhizomes?
They do. I believe they do, actually.
Yeah, that'd be fun for us to try. Eric, you're distracting me with your fingers. Stop it. All right, let me find where I was. Let's talk about competitions. I think as homebrewers, we hear like the entire range of how people feel about competitions. Did you participate in those as a homebrewer? Do you have any advice for when people get some feedback that they may not like, or maybe some feedback that they're excited about? Anything in general with competitions would be great.
I did participate in competitions. I met some good people. I met actually David Schumacher via competition. So I think competitions are great. I think that feedback, I wish I could to this day, like submit my beers into something as cheap and easy as a homebrew competition. You know, to enter into like a professional brewers competition is so much more expensive, so much more difficult from a like logistic standpoint. But I love competitions. I think you have to kind of roll with it because it's very subjective. I mean, they are truly very subjective, but they're so much fun. I made so many good friends and you know, just I learned so much from them. So I entered all of the big ones in the area, and I got very discouraged sometimes, but you know, it's part of it.
Okay, we're going to get into what have had the greatest impact on you as a brewer.
Can you repeat that? You kind of
Yeah.
broke up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, like, what trends have had the biggest impact on you as a brewer?
Trends. So
Like,
when I first started brewing, I mean, the focus was kind of traditionalist, right? Like learning all your styles. And I feel like the last probably 2, 3, 4 years have been where people are trying crazy shit, putting weird shit in their beer. And that has probably had the biggest impact on me because I think even as a home brewer, I wanted to do some crazy shit and I felt like I couldn't. Like if I was going to go to like a festival and I was going to put Raisin Bran in a beer, people are going to like look at me odd. Or if I had chunks in my beer, people are going to be like, what is going on? This beer is all pulp. But I think the, highly fruited has been a huge impact on my beers, because it's kind of been like, that's okay. You can do that. It's acceptable. I think large, huge imperial stouts that are super syrupy, I think those have had a big impact on what we're trying to do. And then obviously like the huge pastry idea has been very, very, very significant to what we're doing, because that's what we're trying to do. So.
And pastry stouts would be those big, chewy, sweet stouts, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they don't always have to be imperial stouts. I mean, you can do a pastry stout that's a, sweet stout. So just a pastry and a beer, I guess.
We have another question. Alex wants to know if there's any collabs coming in, and who do you want to do collabs with that maybe you haven't already had the chance?
Yeah, the anniversary was kind of our big collab debut. We really haven't done any collabs with anybody other than with Yankee Tank in Lawrence. So I foresee a lot of collabs with Cross Strain. Love them. I feel like we have like a very similar mindset, a very similar like philosophy. So I foresee a lot of collaborations with them. We haven't done a lot locally, like with local breweries. So I foresee us kind of trying to work with some of the other breweries. I know Mac and I have been talking about a collaboration since we opened. So I foresee some collaborations with some local breweries that we just haven't had the time, or it just hasn't worked out for sure. But I also envision us continuing to kind of do some regional collaborations with various breweries.
Talking again about like trends, are there any trends in the beer scene that you wish hung on longer?
I don't know. I don't know that there is really something that I was like, hey, I wish that lasted longer. I kind of feel like if we want to do it, we're just going to do it, even if it's not a trend anymore, if that makes sense.
Another question just came through. Brad wants to know, how many barrels did you brew in your first year?
I don't know that answer. I probably should. A lot of barrels, a lot more than Jenna Leah probably knows that answer. I try not to to bog myself down with like I feel like it gets disheartening. It also gets like if you're so focused on this is how many barrels you brewed in your first year and this is how much you brew every week, it kind of becomes like what motivates you, and that's not what I want to do. So my wife pays the taxes on all the barrels that we brew. I kind of keep track of how many how our sales are every week, not necessarily our overall volume. But I bet Janalia knows that answer. Do you want to unmute her? Ask her?
I'll try to unmute her, but I don't know if she'll accept it. We'll see.
She's probably like
I don't
searching
keep track
for
of your barrels.
Ask
I
Brand.
have no idea on how many barrels of beer did she brew last year. I think we submitted 140 something to the BA. Does that sound right? Logical? I don't know.
That sounds right. Yeah, I mean that's what we pay taxes on.
That's a lot of.
It was less than 200 for sure.
It's a lot of brew days.
Oh yeah, 3 to 4 a week. Yeah.
Let's talk about like beer, and like my philosophy is beer should be fun. How do you keep the hobby aspect alive as a pro brewer, knowing how many problems you run into and you never really know what you're getting into every day? How do you keep that fun alive?
It is a challenge sometimes for sure, especially like right now when like everyone is at home and everyone is like working on all these projects around the house, and I'm like at the brewery every single day still working, and like there's no off time. But I think the key to me personally, keeping like the fun in it, is to do different stuff, like to try new things, even just taking an old recipe and being like, hey, I think we could use extra orange, or we could use extra coconut. And this is what we're going to do differently this time. Like, I just think not doing the same thing every day is kind of the key for me, and keeping it like fun and exciting and making it not feel like a job, I guess.
How about things that you're excited about in the current scene? Is there anything in particular that you're excited about that's going on right now in beer?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a resurgence of these traditional style beers that are done really well. And that's not something that I, as a home brewer, ever really focused on. Like, I always won in competition. I always won like the spice, herb, vegetable, the fruited beers. Like, those were always the categories that I won. I never won like the traditional pills, the traditional, you know, pale ale. Like, I never won those categories, but at the end of the day, I really like those beers and I enjoy drinking them. So I personally, from a consumer standpoint, I'm very excited about these breweries like Alma Mater that are doing these beers so well. We will not really be trying that. That's not what we're going to do. That's not what I love, but I like to drink them. So I'm, from a consumer standpoint, really excited to see like a resurgence of some of these very traditional beers done really well.
That was the last regular question. Now we're going to get into a rapid fire section, and I'm going to ask questions very quickly, and you have to answer very quickly. And Christian is going to take notes.
Okay.
And nope, Christian's taking notes. All right, there we go. All right, are you ready for it? What is your favorite non-KC brewery?
WeldWorks.
What is the coolest tap room you've been to?
New Glarus.
What is your favorite beer of all time?
Black Tuesday.
What is your favorite non-malt ingredient in beer? And it can't be, I'm going to say it can't be fruit and it can't be hops.
I was gonna say fruit. Maybe
Still
coriander. I really like coriander. I really like honey.
And then what is the most underrated beer style in your mind?
I think barley wines, right? They're so good.
They are good.
They're
Storms
so
is all about it.
polarizing.
Yeah, Storms is trying to get drunk. He's excited about that. All right, that was everything. I want to open this up to you. If there's anything going on at the brewery you want to share with us, or anything that you want to discuss that we haven't already, I'm going to leave it open to you, and then I'll come back with one last question before we unmute everybody, and they can ask you anything that they've been holding on to.
Yeah, so we just celebrated our 1 year. It was crazy. It was a crazy week. There was a lot going on. There were a lot of orders in the cooler. I think Genelia said we did over 530 orders last week, which is insane. That's a shitload of orders for, to go only. She's probably going to correct me and say it was like 750 or something, but I think it was in the 500s. It was amazing to think about. I was very concerned about our 1 year. I had all these plans for people in the tap room and all these like timed releases, and then to have this, it was rough to try to adapt, but I think it turned out really well. We may have done better than we would have done from a fiscal standpoint. You will never know, but it was great. But now that it's over, I'm actually very excited to kind of focus on some of the things that we've been kind of talking about doing, rebrewing old recipes, finessing, working on volume rather than quantity. So we have some fun beers planned. This next week we have a couple beers, but the following week we got some Cinco de Mayo beers planned that I think will be really nice, and they're beers that we've brewed in the past that people really liked. So I'm excited to rebrew them, and it's kind of the direction that we're hoping to go. Eventually, I really hope we can be a part of Mac's Together We Can event. We're super close to being able to do that. Just volume is our main concern right now.
Oh, on mute. I haven't seen any Kansas breweries at the Together We Can event. Do you know if that's like a Kansas, Missouri thing or what's going on there? Any idea?
So the biggest issue is needing a federal quala for it. Most of us Kansas breweries, we don't need them in order to, like, I don't need them to sell beer in my tap room, whereas in Missouri you would need it. So most Kansas breweries don't have it. So we actually have 3 of them now for like kind of our main beers. We have the Rainbow Sorbet, the Given to Fly IPA, and then we have a double IPA called Birds that is very popular. And we have quals on those. So the issue isn't necessarily that we legally can't. Our issue is primarily that we don't have the volume. 3 barrels is not that many 4-packs. And we want to make sure that we can have enough for our tap room as well as that event. So we're getting ready to do a couple double brew days and kind of fill up our 8 fermenters with double batches of those beers so that we can participate. So
We had one more question come in, and feel free not to answer if you don't want to. What is your least favorite beer that you've put out as a brewery and your most favorite?
I have no problem answering this question. Eggnog. It has been a beer that I have brewed, I think, twice now. Once as a home brewer, once as a professional brewery, and it seems elusive to me. And I think it's because I don't like eggnog, and I'm someone that like very much needs to be able to taste and reproduce the flavors, and I don't like eggnog, so I've been unable to achieve the proper eggnog flavor, but I'm working on it, and I think we're going to redeem ourselves with the eggnog next year. So that's been my least favorite. My most favorite has probably been a beer that not a lot of people got. It was our Sweet Decadence, as my 13-year-old likes to call Sweet D. It was the Girl Scout cookie. We did a Caramel Delight version of it. It was basically the Caramel Delight cookies from Girl Scout cookies with our coconut Caramel Delight. It was fantastic. I've got 1 crowler of it that I'm like saving for a rainy day to pop open. It's my favorite beer that we've brewed to date. There are a couple IPAs, couple double IPAs that I really like a lot as well, but that Sweet Decadence Caramel Delight has probably been my favorite.
Awesome. I don't see any other questions to the chat, and that's all I had for you. So I'm going to stop recording here. And